walk through my kitchen, dining room, bathroom, hallway closet, or basement, you might think that I'm preparing for a medieval apothecary pop-up. I mean, honestly, you wouldn't be wrong. I have jars on jars of herbs, some growing, some drying, some steeping, and somehow they've managed to make themselves very comfortable in every corner of my home. But let me say this up front, I am not a certified herbalist, and so I'm not here to diagnose, treat, or even tell you what to take. I am just a curious, overbooked, full-time working, nighttime reading, herb-loving woman who decided that herbalism had to be something that I could integrate into everyday life, or I wasn't gonna stick with it. So this video is not coming from the top of the mountain. It's coming from the trail. And if you're watching this video, there's probably a good chance we're on the same path. And I'm likely following some of the same herbalists that you are. I've listened to everyone from clinical herbalists to foragers to grandma level folk medicine keepers. And you know, through all of that, I learned that your herbal journey should be just as unique as your story. And right now, mine is personal. Deeply personal. And so the way that I study herbs is shaped by the health profiles of the people that are closest to me. My parents, my brother, my husband, and myself. And I'm not looking for universal remedies. I'm looking for strategic, plant-based remedies to support the very specific patterns, histories, and goals of my little tribe. And that might look very different from yours, and that's okay. In fact, that's exactly how it's supposed to be. But what I can do is walk you through how I've approached learning herbs in a way that feels empowering and doable, even with a full plate. So no, I haven't taken a formal herbal course yet because truthfully, I need this to fit into my life, not take over it. So for me, herbalism has been a mix of learning, applying, making mistakes, but most importantly, having fun with it. And that's been a mix between textbook science and, that worked. And it's also been a mix between what I grow, what I forage, and what I buy. Because there is a strategy that I use to keep things practical. And somewhere along this journey, I came across an unexpected lesson. One that came from a painful chapter in American history and has shifted how I think about herbal medicine altogether. But we'll come back to that. Now, at some point in your herbal journey, you are going to start to question things. Because even as you're reading the books and brewing the teas and listening to the podcast, the thought starts creeping in. How efficacious are these herbs really? And if they work so well, why did we stop using them? Why are some banned now? Why does every modern study end with further trials needed? And who decides what gets studied or published in the first place? Plus, if you've ever read the comments section on YouTube herbal videos, you know it's a hot debate. People want proof, people want data, and I get that. I want that too. So when I started thinking and I was asking myself, okay, so when is the last time that we had to rely on herbs like in a large, wide scale level? The answer came fast. It was the Civil War, and that's not ancient history. That's American history. People on this very soil, nurses, soldiers, doctors, they were all using herbs as medicine, not because it was trendy, but because it was necessary, right? Like that's all they had. Hospitals were overwhelmed and supplies were limited. And guess what? Those plants, they weren't imported. They were growing in the fields, the forests, and even gardens nearby. And so this is where a switch flipped for me because I actually grew up in Western Maryland. So names like Antietam weren't just history class material, they're like down the road. So when I found out that the National Museum of Civil War Medicine was in Frederick, Maryland, I packed a lunch, hopped in the car, and went. If you've never been to the National Museum of Civil War Medicine in Frederick, Maryland, let me take you inside. It's a small museum, but it's curated with care. And if you're into herbalism, natural healing, or just curious about how people survived without CVS on every corner, this place will open your eyes. We all know the dominant storyline of the Civil War, but what often gets lost in that narrative are the quieter revolutions that were also happening. And one of those was medicine. Before the war, hospitals were rare, germ theory wasn't widely accepted, and nursing as a profession, practically unheard of. But this war forced progress because of the sheer scale of injury, disease, and suffering created a kind of pressure cooker, and medicine had to evolve fast. Systems for triage were born, medical schools multiplied, and for the first time, America had to collectively think about public health. To be sure, this wasn't graceful, but it was real, it was messy, and it was recorded. And that's what makes it so rich for anyone on a healing journey today. Because what I found in this museum wasn't outdated, it was enduring. It was a reminder that the medicine that we're trying to connect with today has always been with us. Clara Barton, Dorothea Dix, Susan King Taylor, women stepped into roles that they weren't allowed to hold before. They bandaged wounds, gave comfort, recorded symptoms, and helped legitimize health as a professional field. Their names line the walls of this museum, and you'll see names that you've never heard of before. One thing that truly floored me, the display on native flora used by Civil War physicians. Yarrow, plantain, willow bark, these weren't exotic imports. They were wild herbs growing right outside hospital tents, gathered and prepared by people under unimaginable conditions. So no, this isn't just a place for history buffs. And if you've ever doubted that your homemade tea or salve could matter, remember, healing didn't start in a lab. It started in the dirt, in the woods, and on the battlefield. So after the tour, I wandered into the museum shop, the part where they try to sell you trinkets and replica canteens. But then I saw it, this beautifully curated book stand tucked off to the side, full of titles by local historians and regional authors. And these weren't just generic history books, but really thoughtful, specific works that expanded on everything I just seen. And let me tell you, my brain was buzzing. I was grabbing titles left and right, connecting the dots between battlefield medicine, local plants, and herbal practices that we're trying to reclaim today. And if this is our first time meeting, hi, I'm Cassandra from the blog becomingafarmgirl.com. And I'm here to help you live a farm fresh life without land or livestock. I'm telling you, I left that museum with an even stronger conviction about herbs because they were the medicine that we used when modern medicine simply didn't exist. They were making poultices, infusions, tonics, tinctures, compresses with what they had. And they were documenting it carefully, repeatedly. And the part that struck me was that these weren't just folk tales passed down as vague memories. These were actual doctors' field notes. They were strategy logs and medicinal playbooks in a time of chaos, preserved out of sheer necessity. So when I raided the gift shop, I found these 3 books. And look, you're not going to stumble across these books when you type in herbal medicine on Amazon. These titles are not hitting the algorithm, they are not trending on social media, but they are an absolute gem because these books are going to allow you to connect the dots between history, regional plants, and real world healing. Because then suddenly every weed you spot while walking or hiking suddenly becomes a story waiting to be told. So yes, keep the mainstream herbal titles on standby, but I really want to highlight how you customize your journey because the thing about the mainstream titles is that they are specifically written for like mass and broad appeal. And I don't know a lot about book publishing, but I do have a couple of friends that are authors, and there are certain page quotas that they have to fill. Things have to be kind of field tested to see what is going to be most popular and applicable to a wide audience. And so there's information that will just never make it into a title that is trying to go for, sales and, as I mentioned earlier, mass appeal. But in doing so, you leave out so much information. And one of the things that compares to the titles that I now have versus, the other titles that I absolutely still have and use is that when you go to those titles and you're flipping through to kind of see, maybe what you can find in your particular area, you might not ever find it, or you're still kind of as you're, walking or foraging thinking, well, what exactly is this use? And you just don't know. But if you pause for a moment, the people that lived in your region, 50, 100, 150 years ago likely knew exactly what that particular plant was used for. And as I'll share a little bit later, the way that I have started to build my apothecary is that I am starting with the regional herbs that are in my area that give me the medicinal properties and compounds that I'm looking for, because those are going to be free and fresh. And then after that, I will use my small little deck garden to then grow what I can source. And then beyond that, that is my list then of herbs that I buy. And that has kept things really affordable because herbal medicine can be a bit of a slippery slope. So if you care about proven, regional, and documented use, you want to start with these titles. And let me clarify, not even just these titles, but books by authors in your area. This is a title that I absolutely love, Healing a Divided Nation, How the American Civil War Revolutionized Western Medicine by Caroline Janey. But it is not an herbs and homebrew book. Instead, this is a historical deep dive, but buried within its chapters are major revelations for herbal people. Now, this is just going to be a quick gist of all of these books, but in the first section of the book, she's starting off with a historical scope, and then the medical revolution. Janie traces how battlefield medicine, under pressure, chaos, and constant novelty, became the crucible for modern Western medicine, from antibiotics to triage systems. And it was this pressure cooker environment that forced innovation. And surprise, herbs were a part of that journey. In the field, soldiers and hospital stewards didn't call in shipments of eucalyptus or foreign imports. They harvested what grew nearby, improvised poultices, and documented the results. I love Janie's framing here. She shows us how necessity led to regional herbal practices. And that's the connection that I was craving. Janie also discusses the split between folk remedies and credentialed medicine. After the war, pharmaceutical interests stepped in, patent laws emerged, and the focus shifted. But knowing that herbs were the first line of defense, it rewrites the narrative. They didn't fail because they didn't work. They became left behind by a system chasing profits. One of the quotes that I love from the book is, "Battlefield necessity forced medicinal practitioners to rely on every tool available, including plant-based compounds, and then to record what actually worked under pressure." That sentence hit me like a brick. That's proof. That's field-tested data on the ground. That's not a lab where funding dictates outcomes. You're gonna wanna grab this one too. It's called Civil War Plants and Herbs. Now this is like the nitty-gritty herbalist dream. So in this book, she's giving you things like plant profiles and regional maps, field usage and recorded results, and then cross-regional knowledge sharing. So yeah, the Mitchells just don't say, here's a plant. They map where it's native, what compounds it contains, and why it mattered in the Civil War context. So you just don't learn sage, you learn how Civil War doctors used it against dysentery and respiratory infections, and when quinine and chlorine were rare. This book is basically a historical compendium of field notes. This was given to soldiers with fever. This poultice for infected wounds yielded X outcomes. You see dates, locations, and anecdotal results. This is regional herbalism backed by wartime documentation, not marketing hype. Even amid war, doctors shared field notes between Union and Confederate hospitals. It wasn't about sides or politics, it was about what worked. And this cooperation means that this book bridges bioregions, but still focuses on what grows here, whether Maryland or Mississippi. Yeah, y'all, this book is a time capsule of Civil War medicine. So after I read these two books, I noticed a pattern of necessity, which led to documentation, which then led to oral and written transfer. And that actually is how real world efficacy is proven. And I guess what I'm trying to summarize here by connecting the Civil War and herbs is that the American Civil War may be the largest, almost accidental clinical trial of herbal medicine in American history. So as we all sit and hope that more large clinical trials will happen in the future, there's actually a lot that you can learn from the past. I mean, these are big sample sizes. We're talking about thousands of people across various locations. I mean, it's not a controlled lab, but that's a massive sample of real people. And two, you didn't have any funding conflicts. Today, herbal studies often include that phrase, more trials needed. And you know the reason for that? It's because herbs can't be patented. And big pharma doesn't fund studies that don't yield to exclusivity. And that leaves us hungry for data, but Civil War records are real data. And of course, there's always the question of side effect versus risk. And every commercial drug today comes with side effects, but it also has record-breaking approval. But during the Civil War, these herbs were often safer, accessible, and locally available. And they stood on their own in a medical crisis. And then what I also like about these books is that they give you regional relevance. And that makes it easier to follow the plant trail in your own backyard. So then after diving into Civil War records, I found myself even hungrier for more context. So then I started wondering more and more about, okay, so what were people in Maryland, Virginia, and the Carolinas relying on a day-to-day basis? And that's when I came across one of the most grounding reads on my bookshelf. Southern Folk Medicine by Phyllis D. Light, Healing Traditions from the Appalachian Fields and Forests. And this book is not just herbs, it anchors them into life. And it is a stunning blend of history, culture, climate, and tradition. So I'm just gonna go ahead and read this little excerpt to you. And it says here that documentation of Southern folk medicine principles and practices can be found in several broad categories of sources that can easily be accessed by the general public. Of great importance are books, diaries and journals written by explorers, invaders, and settlers to the New World. Especially helpful are the journals written by physicians and botanists who accompanied Spanish explorers here. Books and newspaper articles written during and immediately after the American Civil War provide a wealth of information by physicians, pharmacists, herbalists, and housewives who had no choice but to use herbal medicines as primary care because the South was a blockade by land and sea, and processed medicines were only available as trade contraband in an illegal market. After the Civil War, books and articles written by individuals, medical botanists, and pre-1900 physicians continued to document the use of Southern folk medicine, especially among poor blacks and whites. Interviews conducted during the Great Depression by the Folklore Project and the American Slave Narratives Project of the Federal Writers Projects of the Works Progress Administration, which are housed in the Library of Congress, provide further information about the use of botanicals for healing. I mean, I would sit here and just read this whole book to you. It is that good. Okay, just one more. Southern and Appalachian folk medicine is a melding, a blending of several healing modalities from several cultures that came together to create something unique. Each culture contributed vital knowledge and practices to the beginnings of a new healthcare framework for a new world. Upon this fertile land, European conventional medicine, influenced by Greek or humoral medicine, Native American plant use, African spiritual practices, and Irish folk medicine practices combined to form Southern and Appalachian folk medicine. Anyways, y'all, I say all this just to put my 2 cents in the pot. Remember, I am like your herbalist enthusiastic friend adjacent. I am not trying to take the place of any of the pros, that are out there. And I am a self-guided, student of learning how to use herbs in my own life. But I just, I have become so tickled. I feel that a lot of us, my own similar journey, you start on YouTube to kind of glean information, and like a lot of the kind of like mainstream stuff buffers up to the top. But I am telling you, it has been so much more anchoring, grounded, and individualized in a way that I wasn't getting from the mainstream books. Again, I want to make sure and be very clear that those texts definitely have their place and I enjoy them. However, in terms of really understanding herbal use and what is already around me in, the parks and even in just like behind like my little townhouse section, there's a section of like woods that like hasn't been built on. And there's so much that's back there that I'm not going to find in a mainstream book, but I'm finding it, in these different texts that I have. And so, yeah, it's a rewarding journey for sure. And I want you to try it.
Now, before I wrap up, I want to give you a quick look at my herbal library. Just a flash tour of the books that are shaping how I learn, experiment, and grow on this journey. Now, my collection is pretty eclectic, and honestly, that's just how I like it. I've got the everyday recipe style books that are great for quick remedies or things like salves, syrups, and teas. Simple, approachable, and practical. But then I've also got books that go a little bit deeper into how herbs function in the body, more than just what to take, but also why it works. Some are written in a more modern clinical tone, and some are thrifted treasures, older herbal texts written in voices that we don't hear much anymore, but are still packed with wisdom. Now, of course, I have the classics like the Peterson Field Guides and a few wild herb books that look beyond the usual suspects, which is helpful when you're trying to connect with what's actually growing in your region. Now, I also like to keep books that reflect the kind of life that I am hoping to build towards, things like herbal care for pets, livestock, and the homestead. We are not there yet, but one day I would love to have a setup where I can address things naturally before resorting to pricey vet bills. And then, yes, there are the big ones too, books on medical herbalism, contraindications, formal herbal education, texts that are way over my head right now, but I want them within reach. I don't always want to search on the internet or scroll through digital clutter when I can just flip open a trusted book that I already own. Now, this collection is not about being an expert, it's about being a student, a lifelong one. So here's a quick glimpse at the titles on my shelf, just in case you're building a library of your own.
To get more herbal inspiration, click the video on your screen. I'll see you in my kitchen or garden soon. Take care, friends.